My hand would find it from body memory and not have to go hunting around. I'd been carrying it the small of my back when I wanted to be ultra-concealed, until I'd done some training drills and discovered that if the gun wasn't at my side where I usually carried, it took me a few extra seconds to draw, aim, and fire. Those few seconds could cost me or someone else their life out in the field, so I started having belt loops put on my skirts, and the very unfeminine belt slide through all of the waists, because that was what it took to hold the gun, any gun, in place. I could change my holster, my gun, but the gun needed to be at my side for my hand to find it automatically. I was just glad I'd found out in training and not in the field. In training, you could fix it. In the field, you got dead. Nathaniel Grayson stood beside me in a gray tailored suit that showed off the broad shoulders, slender waist, and nice ass, and slid over the swell of his thighs like a polite glove. Tight enough to show off, but not so tight it was obvious. The lavender dress shirt was buttoned up to the smooth line of his neck and gave his skin just a little color, and the hint that he'd probably tan if he ever tried, but he didn't bother. The shirt also deepened the color of his eyes, so they were more intense than the shirt, like violets to the shirt's paler lilac. His driver's license said his eyes were blue because they wouldn't let him put purple down as a choice. His tie was silver, with a tie bar that looked silver but was actually platinum because it wouldn't make his skin react, since like most shapeshifters he was allergic to silver. His almost ankle-length auburn hair was back in a tight braid, so he didn't trip me when we danced. His hair never seemed to get in his way when he moved. Maybe it was practice. He was an exotic dancer, and the hair was often loose while he worked. He was smiling and moving ever so slightly in time to the music. I had enough dancers in my life, from exotic to professional ballet, to know that they all moved, even when they thought they were standing still, as if their bodies couldn't help but make grace out of the noise of everyday life. Manny had been standing next to his slender daughter, gazing up at her, because Connie had gotten about 5 inches of extra height from her mother's side of the genetics. But now he was dancing with his wife. 2 of her brothers had been dragged onto the dance floor by their wives. Rosita's brothers towered over most of the other men in the room, not just tall, but wide, like big burly refrigerators who smiled often, bright smiles in dark faces. They hugged more as the afternoon reception wore on. At least 2 of them had gone to college on football scholarships, though I wasn't sure which of the 6 it had been. Another ran his own heating and cooling business. One was an accountant, and another did something about freight hauling. They'd been introduced to me in a mass as, "These are my brothers." Rosita had rattled off their names and jobs too fast for me to follow all of it. I figured the names were more important to remember than jobs, so I concentrated on that. I could name 4 out of 6. At one point, she'd tried to fix me up on a blind date with one of them, back when she was convinced I'd end up an old maid at 24. Lucky for me that I was engaged at 31, or Rosita would have been having fits. Rosita was built like her brothers, though I'd seen pictures of her wedding to Manny, and she'd been a tiny slip of a girl. But that's what can happen when you marry a girl before she's stopped growing taller. She'd been a couple inches below his 5'6" once, but now she was 5'8" or maybe 5'9", and 3 children plus several miscarriages had broadened the rest of her. But Manny gazed up at her as if she were still the delicate girl he'd fallen in love with as they danced, his head resting on her ample bosom. The drinks had been flowing enough that she didn't make him move his head now. Connie, the bride, and Mercedes, her sister and maid of honor, were built like Manny's lean and wiry frame, but tall like models thanks to Rosita. They were talking excitedly across the room. Their brother, Tomas, sat in a corner across the room in the wheelchair that Connie had finally persuaded him to use. The crutches he'd used to walk up the aisle were leaning by the chair, his hand on them, so he'd know he could get back up. He was 13 and had never been badly hurt before. The first time is an eye-opener. He'd used crutches to stand in church, proud to be on the groom's side, but by the time the ceremony was over, he'd been pale and sweating. Getting shot will do that to you, even if it was a few weeks ago. He'd missed going to state with his track and field team because a bad guy had kidnapped Connie and him. I'd been part of the team that had stopped the bad guy.